We're rolling? Cool. Hey everybody, good morning or good afternoon or good evening, wherever you are in the world. I'm Alex Mittal, and we're here for another edition of FC Live on Facebook. I'm here joined today by Rebecca Kaden of Maveron.
Hello.
It's great to have you on.
Thank you so much for having me.
We're very lucky to have Rebecca here with us today, and I think just to get started, I thought it'd be great if you could maybe share a little bit about the firm,
Sure.
basically, and just a little bit of history in terms of what you do there, maybe if that's evolved over time and what you do there right now.
Yeah, absolutely. So Maveron is a consumer-only early-stage venture capital firm started in 1998, originally by Howard Schultz, who's the chairman and CEO of Starbucks, and my partner, Dan Levitan, who's based in Seattle. We have two offices, Seattle and San Francisco. We're now on our sixth fund. We're not a strategic or family office of Starbucks. We're an independent venture capital fund, but we take a lot of cues from them around what does it mean to build a great brand. And from the beginning, what Maveron has focused on is building great brands where technology is a leverage. So how do you take great product, technology, and platform and wrap it in the right kind of story and emotion to build a great, long-lasting, sticky brand? We focus largely on Series A. We write checks of kind of $3 to $7 or $8 million to lead Series A rounds, and then we write a whole bunch of earlier stage seed checks as well, really behind founders that we think have the potential to build kind of those long-lasting, sticky brands. And that's really across categories: e-commerce, marketplaces, mobile, fintech, health tech, anything where you can build kind of that end-user consumer brand.
So you mentioned stories.
Yes.
And I don't know if our viewers know this out there, but Rebecca previously was a journalist with The Economist, is that right?
Yeah, I wrote for The Economist in London, and then a publication in San Francisco called Narrative.
Narrative, okay, interesting. And so, like, I guess as a follow-up to what you just said, you mentioned stories, and I actually saw, I was like stalking you on Twitter, and I saw like stories in your headline.
Yes.
Can you share a little bit about why stories are important to you, to Maveron, and maybe if there's a connective thread to
absolutely.
Your past as well?
Yeah, so I think stories are very, very critical to early stage businesses. What an early stage founder has to do is take the combination of an idea and technology and people and weave it into this narrative that can make something out of nothing. Right? And what that is a story. It's how do you craft the tale of getting from nowhere to somewhere. And oftentimes you have to tell that story way ahead of where you are today. And I really look for people who are great at telling stories. And I do that because I think it's important at basically every element of that journey. It's important in how you motivate your team, in how you sell to investors, and how you sell to customers, and how you get partners on board. Being able to tell that narrative, I think, is a pretty critical piece of that journey. And when you think of a journalist and what they're doing, they're trying to do the same thing. They're trying to take, more data points than you probably need and less than you want, and craft a narrative out of that to become a story. And the the output of VC is quite different, and the risk tolerance that you need is quite different. But the idea of, you can always say no. How do you say yes? You kind of convince yourself of that story has a lot of similarities, I think.
That's cool. So can you, and I think this is true for a journalist, it's probably true for a VC as well. So while storytelling is, and I totally agree, that makes a lot of sense in terms of, it's sort of, so much is against you in the beginning, especially, like you've got to be able to sell your vision and dream and story to customers, to new hires, to investors like you're pointing at. But how do you, as the journalist, or as the, I guess now a VC, discern just a good story from a good story and a great company?
Those are obviously two different things. I think a story is a piece of it, and then you have to, in some ways crack that story open. And to us, the biggest piece of that is who's telling it. How can you get faith in that entrepreneur, that they can do that path, that they can kind of follow through on the story that they laid out and build something out of nothing. And we've spent a lot of time trying to put meat behind that answer, use data to think about what creates a great entrepreneur. But we think, being able to tell a story is one quality, but great people build great businesses. And so that's the kind of crux of it.
Sure. And I should probably point out, for those who don't know, like Maveron has a long history in venture capital, and there's companies in the portfolio dating back to, I think, is it
eBay was our first investment.
From eBay to Pinkberry, right? I think even
yeah. So that's a little bit of an outlier, but yeah, started with eBay
Yeah.
in 1998. Have done great brands across commerce like Zulily, Everlane, Allbirds, but also fintech like Earnest and marketplaces, mobile like Periscope. Pretty broad range, but all have that kind of consumer.
And I
presence to it.
purposefully said from eBay to Pinkberry because
Very
I
different.
think it's actually kind of interesting in terms of like the connective thread through all the companies you just mentioned, including Periscope, for example. It's like the consumer-facing element to it.
Yeah.
What about consumer resonates with you? Because clearly you could have gone joined with any firm, and I think that Maveron seems to distinguish itself through the lens on like, hey, no
enterprise here.
We're not gonna. Yeah, it's exactly like it's not like you're kind of consumery. It's like that's the
strict rule.
Right.
Yeah, I think for two reasons. One is, and I've drank all the Maveron Kool-Aid there is to drink around this, but I think focus is an asset. I think. Venture is a big word. It means a lot of things in a lot of different ways. And the more you can focus the lens, the better you can be at something. And for us, that something is consumer. I think we have a core belief that whether or not you're building a brand in financial services or mobile video like Periscope or shoes like Allbirds, how do you engage the hearts and minds of customers? How do you sell? How do you become sticky? There's a lot of parallels and similarities between those. And so by focusing on consumer, we think we can be better spotters and pickers and also add more value to the companies. I think, I like consumer because it's really hard. Customers are irrational. I think people don't follow playbooks that you want them to follow. And so your job is to take super rational business models and predict irrational customer behavior and try to figure out where those are going to meet together.
Have you read Predictably Irrational?
Yeah.
Is that in that vein of
Yeah. There's tons of evidence that, people never quite behave as you think or want them to.
Got it. So there's... Yeah, interesting. And I guess I've alluded to some of your past, but how did you end up in venture capital as a career? And I realize you've been in this now for a long time.
About 5 years or so. Very kind of randomly and luckily, which I think actually is more often the norm than not for early stage VCs, but my journalism career led me to working at this startup called Narrative, where I got interested not only in writing, but how would you make money off of content online, which is a difficult problem in and of itself, which eventually led me to business school at Stanford, where I thought I would join probably a bigger technology company. And a mentor of mine there, who was a guy named Bill Campbell, who recently passed away, but was kind of an amazing coach to many people, and me included, was a close advisor to Maveron, and he had a real art around kind of getting under what people would be good at. And he suggested to me, I think you would like venture capital, and I think you would like Maveron. Go work for the smartest people you can find early in your career. And he introduced me to them while I was still at school. I joined, and I just kind of stuck around.
Wow, yeah. So many people have a Bill story. So
yes, he's an absolute legend.
Yeah. So I think this would be a good transition to the audience. So by the way, as a reminder, if you write in the comment section your question, our team here is going to surface that, and I'll be asking those questions live. So please just submit questions, and we'll go ahead and get them answered here. So so this question is from Dan. Dan is asking, what are the top 3 attributes that you look for in future unicorn consumer startups?
So we're doing these at pretty early stages, right? We're Series A investors, if not seed investors. So I'll actually give you 4, which is like team, and then big market. I think, you can't build a venture scale company in a market that can't support it. But once you check that box, I'm a big believer that the best teams are going to build the greatest companies as long as they have the market that gives them the potential. So I think the way I think about this question is what makes a great entrepreneur? And we actually have a kind of living document, a living scorecard of 10 attributes that change over time that we map to great entrepreneurs that we've seen and try to think about it when we meet new people. And some of those include the ability to go very fast. being an all-star recruiter, being able to convince people to kind of get on your bus before it's obvious, so that you meet a team and you think, how did they get that person to join, whether it's as a team member, an advisor, a board member. I actually think that's probably the best indicator of a company's success. The ability to balance kind of big picture vision and wanting to conquer the world with a really detail-oriented approach, and so on from there.
Got it. That's really insightful. Thanks. Okay, next question from Sherman. Does Maveron have an entrepreneur fund, and if so, what's been the benefit of that, and do you have thoughts about funds that have an entrepreneur fund?
Yeah, so this is kind of like a LP fundraising
Insider
baseball. So
we have a very sophisticated audience.
Yeah, I like that. An entrepreneur fund, I think, means different things at different funds. So I'll explain it how we think about it. We do have a portion of our fund that's carved out for individuals, of which entrepreneurs are a piece. And we do that because of alignment. I think the first is there's no better kind of vote of confidence from the people you back to say, we like not only how you act with us, but how you act with your whole portfolio, and we want a piece of that. We love that. We think of Maveron as a family. We love when our entrepreneurs want to get involved. It happens relatively frequently, and we really value that as part of our community. But we also just believe in alignment in general, that having everyone's skin in the game makes a difference. We're LPs in our own fund. A big portion of Maveron comes from the investors, and we do that because we want to feel it with you, and we think that's the best way to do it. And if the entrepreneurs can feel it with us too, that's great.
Got it. Okay. So next question from Ratik. And by the way, like for all of the questions that follow, if you feel free to feel free to ask hard questions, and also for you, feel free to interpret the questions however you want and answer.
Bring them on.
I think this one's an interesting one. If you have a brilliant idea, but I have none of the resources to make my idea, how can I protect my idea before anyone in the market copies it? How can I attract investors, potential workers, etc.?
This is a hard question, and it's a relevant one to a lot of people. And we think about this question, and I think sometimes the answer is disappointing, but and I prefer positive answers over negative ones, but I think the answer is kind of you can't. That particularly in consumer, ideas are awesome and unfortunately rarely unique. And it's a real execution game, that sometimes there's a barrier in entry and speed to market, but often even then there's, the history of consumer is littered with times where first entrants get surpassed by better product, better timing, better experience. I think, we always think about this with new markets, not only is the idea there, but are the customers ready to receive it? I think VR is an example right now where that conversation is going on, right? And so I think having an idea is a first step, and an important first step, but showing that you can make that into reality. And largely the first part of that is, who can you get around you to help? Maybe you don't have all the skills to do it, but who can you convince that this is a great idea, and have them help you kind of make it a reality, and how quickly can you do that? So I would start there.
Got it. Yeah. So speaking of VR, this isn't an audience question, but just riffing off of that, you mentioned timing and VR. And what are your thoughts currently on consumer-facing startups in VR right now? Like, tell us the...
It's an intensely debated topic, including at Maveron. So my views don't even necessarily reflect all of my partners. We like an active debate on this, and we have invested in VR. And I would say we've invested in VR among very selectively, and with people who we believe can stand the test of time, are super all-star A entrepreneurs, and have a real kind of wizard-like approach to not only kind of seeing where the market's going, but helping make that market. I think my attitude is the technology is awesome. I think there will be applications for it, but that in consumer, you don't often get rewarded for being first. You get rewarded for seeing interesting trends in consumer behavior and creating it at the right moment to adopt them.
Sure.
And I'm not sure we're quite there yet with VR.
Sure. Sort of like an Apple Steve Jobs move kind of thing.
Yeah, which is hard, obviously.
Yeah, cool. All right, another audience question. This is from tailor, and it's a very specific question, is Maveron looking at beacon technology or any other omni-channel technologies aimed at improving brick and mortar retail?
Got it.
For audience members who don't, like beacon technology meaning like locating consumers or products within a physical space.
Yeah, so I will broaden beacon technology to mean there's lots of technologies that are being built that are actually very interesting in terms of improving how we shop in the real world. And partly that's because what we're learning with great brands, and I think kind of something some have already known, but it's becoming very clear, is great brands are built off of delivering great products to the people who want them, not off of a channel. So you're seeing now that, you know, companies are less e-commerce businesses or subscription box businesses or flash sale businesses than they are awesome products that we want, and we're going to get customers across many different kinds of channels. And offline's a piece of that, but we don't want to look at offline, you know, in a Macy's way of lots of aisles and crowded products. How do you bring technology and data and insight into the offline world? We think that's super interesting. It's incredibly relevant to many of our companies and many of our portfolio companies that are building great offline experiences. It's not something we invest in directly because it's not a B2C application. So we care about it because we want our companies to be thinking about that and we want to help, but we don't invest in retail technology that are selling into other brands. We invest in the end user consumer brands.
The company that touches the consumer themselves.
Yeah.
And you mentioned brand. This isn't an audience question, but I was curious about does Maveron or do you look for brands or technology companies, either, both? Like, how do you think about companies from that lens? In other words, oftentimes like you're looking to fund the winner, right? And some people say like, oh, like technology is a way to do that. And I think you kind of pointed out just now how actually brand and being close to the consumer sometimes is part of that answer. So I'm curious, what do you think of like brand versus technology? We
look for both, which is obviously a cop-out answer. So the way I look at it as technology is a fire for brands. It's the superpower that lets them scale and beat the natural curves of linearly growing as a consumer company. Fire that lets you kind of do the abnormal and go faster than you thought was possible to kind of do new things, reach customers in different ways. Customers don't fall in love with technology. Sometimes we forget that around here because we fall in love with technology all the time in our Silicon Valley world bubble sometimes, and we're thinking about it all the time. And I love technology, but when you think about mass consumers, they don't fall in love with technology. They fall in love with what technology allows them to do, right? So they don't fall in love with the iPhone because of what the iPhone is built with, right? What it's made of. They fall in love with what an iPhone will let you do. That you can not only talk on the phone, but call your car or scroll through pictures or FaceTime with your, friends abroad. And we try to always remember that you need the real application that customers love and fall in love with, and you need the ability to make that grow at an abnormal speed in combination. Right.
I remember hearing a talk with Brian Chesky at Airbnb talking about love, for example, as something that's core to them. Actually, for us at FundersClub, love is one of our values as well, and I think that's so important.
Love is one of our values too. I think love is a strong word, and I think we think about it like we love working at Maveron, we love our portfolio companies, and the customers have to absolutely love these products and services for them to get big enough for them to kind of do what we want them to do.
Got it. And just following up one more question related to this brand question, do you think that you can spot killer brands, like brands that will go on to become very successful and big at the seed stage where you're
It is very hard. I don't know that I can do it yet. I'm definitely trying, and it's not a perfect science. So what I try to think of is what is a brand, right? And how do you build a brand? And I think some people say it's like a look or a feel, and that's kind of part of it, but it's not the heart of it. I think there are elements that you can see are part of a brand from very early days, sometimes even before the product exists, and are even more part of how an entrepreneur thinks. Brands require immense amounts of trade-off, right? Long-term and short-term trade-offs. You're going to often trade off short-term revenue opportunity for long-term consistency and vision. I think one core element of brand, and this is something Starbucks has in spades that I try to remember a lot, is the value of consistency. that the message is always the same, that the experience is the same, that you unify the thing that matters, that you have a very clear value proposition, and you unify that message to customers in every touch point they have, online and off, mobile and web, whatever it may be. And that's very hard in the early days of a business, but I think certain entrepreneurs have kind of a natural tendency towards that.
Cool. All right, back to the audience. Question from Eric. How would a tech app in the B2C healthcare sector best approach Maveron to pitch going from seed to Series A funding? I'm guessing Eric is one of those tech apps. But.
Well, there's the logistical answer of this, which is go to Maveron.com. I'm all over it. My email is there, my LinkedIn is there. I am extremely accessible and very much willing to be, contacted. I'm eager to hear from people. Then there's the more tactical answer, which is we really, particularly in a Series A, prefer to know people over time. I think the average we've known our portfolio companies before writing a multi-million-dollar check is about a year and a half. That doesn't always happen. That's an average. So some we've backed many times before, and it's a lot longer, and sometimes it's shorter. But what it's indicative of is that we like building relationships, and we like to get to know people over time. All goes back to that core thesis that we believe great entrepreneurs build great businesses. We're not unique in that. Our peers say very much the same thing, but, contacting us and building that relationship before you have a deck and you want term sheets in 2 weeks is generally the right way to go.
Got it. Question from Peter from the audience. Can you tell us one investment decision that you would have done something differently in retrospect? So, for example, invested in a company that you later realized maybe we shouldn't have. That's kind of an
I can
extreme,
tell you 50 of them. But I'll do one. So he said, invest in a company that you had passed on. That's an easy one for me to answer because there are many companies that I would have invested in that I passed on as I've been learning. So a good one is one of the first companies that I actually sourced and looked at Maveron was Stitch Fix. And we passed it was super early. It didn't look like the way it looked today. It wasn't obvious. But there was something that Katrina, who's now a close friend and someone I admire a lot, was doing that we should have known. And she was recruiting people. She was punching above her weight in terms of who she was recruiting. She was getting people on board that believed in her, that had immense experience, way more than her, that were highly qualified and that could kind of punch through walls. Mike Smith, who was the original COO, now GM of Men's, had run Walmart.com. He was someone we really admired. Head of algorithms for Netflix was another, and that's hugely indicative, it turns out, of the future success of a company. So, the numbers were very early. It wasn't obvious that women wanted to shop this way. There was a lot of unknowns, but we should have seen something in the team that we didn't see.
Good answer, yeah. So, any other?
There are many.
I'm waiting for number 2 to 50.
Yeah.
There's 7 minutes.
2 to 50 is a long list.
Kidding, right? Okay, this is from. I see. This is from a company.
Okay.
What methods and advice would you suggest to give a valuation to a hardware company? The actual question says like ours, but Rebecca has no context on the company, so just sort of high level. How should a founder, I suppose, think about their valuation
as a hardware
company,
or in production after a successful Indiegogo campaign? Hardware. So, unlike some others, I actually like hardware. We have several hardware companies that are quite interesting. One being Eargo, which is a hearing aid. Hearing aids turn out to be a fantastic market, and you can build a product that's truly 50 times better. And there are customers who will buy hearing aids, and then the question is, are they buying yours? And so that's a hardware company that I'm super excited about, and we've done hardware before. We did Tile, August, Smart Lock. So it's in our wheelhouse. What I would say about building hardware, which may be a controversial answer, is you have to believe it's a 0 or 1. That what you're building can be so big that it kind of doesn't matter the pricing along the way because it's going to take so much money. Our lesson over and over with hardware is it takes more time and more money than you think from the beginning. Unlike software where mistakes are inexpensive, mistakes in hardware are extremely expensive, both in time and in money. even more so than e-commerce. I actually have a high comfort level with physical product and inventory from e-commerce. Hardware turns out to be kind of a different world altogether. So the way I look at hardware funding is take money all the time. Throw out the idea of kind of the traditional series of raises and constantly be raising, because you're going to need all the money you can get to fight the journey. I think our belief on hardware is like the biggest risk is running out of money, because you're going to make a mistake along the way and it's going to be expensive.
As a former hardware entrepreneur
What do you
myself,
think?
I can wholeheartedly agree with everything Rebecca just said. Yeah, and there's exceptions to every rule.
Yes.
So I'm sure there's you can build a massively successful consumer hardware company raising $0.
For sure.
But by
Please
and
tell
large,
me if you're doing that.
By and large, that seems to be more usually the case. So this next one's a great question from Matt, also an audience question. I think pretty practical for a lot of founders out there. There has been an ambiguity around seed versus Series A masquerading as seed. What is your experience, and where does Maveron land in this mixed up labeling? This is super important to entrepreneurs trying to figure out what milestones to focus on. And so for those who don't have like the full context, I think there's some blurred lines around
Absolutely.
The names of rounds, like seed round, Series A, and the size of the raise and the stage of the company raising. And could you shed light for like founders out there on like what to make of all this?
Yeah, and partly that's because it changes a little bit with the category you're in, right? But the way we look at it is seed is you have a great idea, you have the beginning of something, and now you need to see if you can make it come to life. Series A is, can you put money behind it to grow? That doesn't mean that every channel has to be de-risked. It doesn't mean that you know exactly every unit economics you're working with, but you have some idea, and there are positive indications. I think if you're going to raise, $5 million in seed money to start, you're probably doing that because you've done something before, and there are people who really believe in you who are going to give it to you more for what you've already done than what you're doing today. And I think there's kind of a sliding scale between experience and money a little bit. The more you've already done, the more you can probably raise before you do your next thing. But I'd err on the side of how little money can you raise to prove that there's something there before you raise money to make it really grow and scale. I think in a seed, it's generally a mistake when the money goes towards scaling. I think it's often more successful when the money goes to kind of figuring out the model, figuring out the holes, and using the Series A money to then put scale behind it.
Got it. Cool. So next question from the audience is from Peter. And I believe this is like an investor question. Have you ever seen or like what is the best example of being presented with a great idea or product but the founders or CEO doesn't meet your founder criteria? And if so, like what do you do as a VC or as an angel investor?
So it's a complicated question because founder criteria, we have a pretty high bar on the founder, and actually this happens all the time.
Team.
Yeah,
So.
yeah. We care a lot about who the founder is, and it actually happens all the time. And it's kind of one of the like heartbreaks of this job a little bit, where you see companies and ideas that you think are really awesome and not the teams that you believe in to execute it. And we pass is what we do, basically every time. We have kind of one of the greatest things about joining a firm that has a history behind it is I get the benefit of learning from lessons that I didn't have to go through myself. And I can learn from my partners who have done it for longer than I have, as well as, the network of mentors and investors around me who I've learned from. And this is something they'll teach you 100 times over. If you don't believe in the team, it's not going to happen, and you should pass.
Right. Yeah. Cool. Okay. And we're kind of in the tail end of our time here today. I think we'll run a little bit over just because there's so many great questions remaining, but there'll maybe room for a couple more questions. So if you have any, now's the time to try to slip them in here. So this question is from Chris, asking how about what milestones do you look for when you're investing, and are there any? I guess these are two totally different questions. So I guess let's just start with that. Like, what milestones do you look for before investing?
Kind of goes back to the question before. I think in the seed, we're really focused on the people. Is the market big enough? is the person impressive and someone we think we want to be in business with, and who we think might want to be in business with us. We're trying to figure out, is it the right alchemy? Is it the right partnership? And can we see how they operate rather than have to hear about it later? So it's less about what you've already done and more about you and what you're going to do. In an A, it's a little bit different. We really do look for, is there a reason, can you make the argument that this is going to work and that money can go to growth? And how do those pieces kind of come together?
Got it. And for Chris's benefit, I'll ask the other question that doesn't really have to do with the first one, but are there any verticals that Maveron or you don't look at, or won't invest in, I should say?
Yeah, there are. We don't do drugs, porn, liquor, gambling. That's LP rules. And then there are verticals we just don't really like. The wedding industry is something that there's tons of startups in, and we just don't really like wedding companies for lots of reasons why that we could go into another time. So there are certain things like this that we have bias against, but basically besides the things that our LPs rule us out of, we like to consider a whole wide range of verticals, including ones that have kind of sticky, old school regulatory issues to them.
Got it, okay. And then another audience question from Dylan. And it's very specific, so maybe this could conjure up some interesting backstory here, but would you invest in KeyRig or a similar beverage company during its first 3 years of operation?
Well, it's an interesting question, because we'd probably only invest in KeyRig or a similar company in its first 3 years of operation, because after that, it's probably too late for us, and I definitely wish we'd invested in KeyRig in its first 3 years of operation.
Maybe we'll reframe the question as, like, would you invest in KeyRig? And since you're saying, yes. Like, what about KeyRig is it like going back in time would have stood out?
So a couple of things, right? Convenience as a driver is a great customer value proposition. More for less. I think that's a core value prop that customers really understand. Can you get more for less money? More quality, more product, more of something by spending less. And KeyRig is partly in that category, right? You're going to have this upfront cost, but it's going to save you that trip to Starbucks every day, and over time that will save you money. And so those two things, we would kind of look at the market, coffee is big enough, and think about it that way.
Cool. All right, I think this will have to be the last question,
yeah.
But just rounding it out, this question's from Siri. What skills and instincts do you bring over from your time in journalism or media to investing, and what, on the other hand, have you had to change about your thinking now that you're a VC or have been a VC for a while?
A lot. I think the core thing I bring over is a deep curiosity about people. I think people drive these businesses, people drive stories and magazines. This is all about people. Can they make it happen? And I'm super curious about who people are, what drives them, why they're doing something. I think I really believe that to build a great consumer business, money is a motivator, but it can't be the only motivator. You're doing it for some reason. Like, these businesses are hard. They are so hard to build. Why are you doing it? And I love getting under that and really getting to know people and understanding what makes them tick. And that served me in both industries. I think the output, the risk tolerance, understanding scale, understanding timelines, in journalism, you publish a story and you're on to the next. In venture, you live with your decisions for a really, really long time. It's really a partnership, and it keeps going, and that's a very different skill to develop.
Great. Well, very articulate, Rebecca.
Thank you so much for having me.
This is an awesome time, and we have a lot more questions, but we're going to have to call it an end here. But thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you.
And thank you again, Rebecca, for joining.
Thanks for having me.
It was a great time.
Awesome.
And we'll see you guys next time.